It's finally happening. Rivian is actually getting serious, okay? They've confirmed the unveiling date. It was rumored a little bit earlier, but now we have it straight from Rivian's Twitter account and Instagram pages as well. The R2 will be unveiled on March 7th. Pretty much just a month from now, they are going to showcase what their next generation vehicle will be. Still not really sure if there's going to be more than one vehicle unveiling. We know that the first R2 product that they make is most likely to be a smaller, cheaper version of the R1S, which I assume means it will be called the R2S, but I also think there's a chance they could end up making a smaller, cheaper version of the R1T, which I know a lot of you are probably already thinking. R1T, already not a full-size pickup truck, why would you go even smaller? Well, personally, I think it's actually a great idea, because there's so many other companies out there that are trying to target the big, fat F-150 size pickup truck first, and there's a lot of competition in that, with Tesla ramping up the Cybertruck and GM eventually going to be launching the Silverado EV, which probably isn't a very profitable vehicle, which is why I'm skeptical that GM will keep it around, but at least on paper, that pickup truck sounds really great. I would like to see more companies kind of go like the Tello truck route and focus on trying to make something a little bit more efficient, a little bit more size conscious for people that still want a pickup truck for getting work done, but also need to drive around in big cities and have tighter parking spaces that they have to fit inside. Maybe something a little bit closer to the Ford Maverick, which honestly I think is a really cool, practical pickup truck for a lot of people. They're surprisingly popular where I live, but if there was just an electric version of it that didn't need as big a battery pack because it was smaller, maybe a little bit more aerodynamic help, I don't know. I have a hard time not getting excited for the R2T, whatever that ends up looking like, but fairly likely it's not going to be the first thing they come out with at their new Georgia plant, which is where they've said they're going to be manufacturing the R2 vehicle. And of course, Rivian has already seen that the R1S is far higher in demand than the R1T, so it makes sense. Start with the bread and butter, start with the one that everybody's gonna want. And the reason I say Rivian is getting real in this video is because this is supposed to be, at least according to Rivian's executives, closer to a Model Y in terms of pricing, and they've said they fully expect it to qualify for the federal tax credit. Probably won't start delivering until 2026, so even though they're unveiling it within a month, it's still probably not going to launch very quickly then after. So that makes it kind of hard to get excited, but we know that Rivian is not really on track to achieve profitability with the current R1 lineup. They're a lot closer to profitability than they were when they first started, but if you've been looking at their financials, you know that they're kind of leveling out, losing about $30,000 per car they sell, which is not good. It's not sustainable. They can't keep doing that forever, and I think the delivery van will probably help them stay afloat. There appears to actually be some decent margins on the delivery van compared to the R1T and R1S, but the R2 is what's supposed to either make or break the company, which is why it's kind of a big deal. It's a vehicle that they intend to go a lot more international with, and they've said would be smaller and cheaper, so that's why the Unveil is such an interesting aspect of this whole process. Like, okay, if it's supposed to be smaller and cheaper, how are you going to make it compelling and captivating? How is it going to look alongside the Model Ys and the ID4s and the Ioniq 5s of the world that are currently, you know, the best-selling EVs out there? How does Rivian carve out their own chunk of the market while still having that classic Rivian feel to it? How does it retain that Rivian adventurous spirit while also not breaking the bank? In fact, we've actually seen some patents recently that showcase what the R2 design might look like. A little bit more circular headlight design, kind of like combining the headlights of the delivery van alongside the R1S. So it still honestly looks very much like a Rivian, but I think the interior is where we're probably going to see a ton of changes, like maybe not so stylized, maybe not so complex as the R1's current interior, which is gorgeous, by the way. I'm a huge fan of the R1T and R1S. They're incredible vehicles. They're so capable and so practical, but that's the problem. Like, even at $80,000, $90,000, Rivian's losing money on them. So they need to rethink their manufacturing process, and a lot of that stems back to the design. Personally, I think that means dual motor only. There's not going to be any need for quad motor setups on the R2 line. If anything, I actually think Rivian should consider doing a rear-wheel drive variant, even though I know a lot of you are like, Rivian's trying to be, you know, these off-road people. They're trying to be an adventurous vehicle. Why would you make it rear-wheel drive? But the truth is, I've seen a lot of Rivians, and it's quite obvious that a lot of them have never once been off-road. There's definitely a lot of people that buy Rivians purely because they like the aesthetic, they like the brand, and they like what it stands for, and they like the functionality and the utility of it. That doesn't necessarily mean they're all off-roaders or that they're all looking for the fastest possible vehicle out there. No, there's some people that just like the overall design. They like what the company's going for. They like the software. And I think brand recognition and how vehicles come off as more of like a fashion piece sometimes more than they are purely utility plays more into vehicle sales than Tesla is probably realizing. Like, Tesla just thinks, well, if the specs are good and the price is low, people are going to buy our product. But you look around on the road, the best-selling cars and the ones that you're seeing all the time are not necessarily the cheapest, or they're not necessarily the most practical. And it's because car purchasing for a lot of people can be a very emotional decision, and a lot of people know that the car they drive, whether it be the style or the color or the form factor, is going to be a reflection of them everywhere they go. Wherever they show up, wherever they park, people are going to see them getting out of it. So they care a bit about the characteristics of not just the look of the car, not just as it stands as a fashion piece, but also what the brand represents. And I know a lot of you guys probably don't agree with this statement. I don't either, but I've talked to a lot of people out there that simply will not drive Teslas because of Elon. They just don't like Elon and they don't want to be associated with him. And that's a big enough reason for them to not go forward with buying from Tesla. Even though I don't agree with those things, I understand there are people out there that feel that way and they will buy brands based on kind of the audience and the staff around them and who's leading the company. But basically, that's all just a complicated way of saying that I think Rivian could make some vehicles that may not necessarily be the best at adventuring, but are still practical and useful, and Rivian does need to find ways to make vehicles more affordable to manufacture. So taking powertrains out, or hopefully building more lithium iron phosphate batteries in the United States so they can still qualify for the federal tax credit while also being cheaper to produce by not relying on nickel or cobalt. And the R2 vehicle still seems pretty sizable, so I think it could accommodate for a fairly large LFP battery pack. And the bigger issue that has me concerned a lot for the R2 platform is, of course, it's supposed to turn the company profitable. It's high volume production, so people have these expectations on range of it being pretty high. Oh yeah, it's got to easily get 330, maybe 350 miles of range in order for it to be mainstream and popular. And they've teased the images of the R2 under a blanket, and we can tell that it's pretty boxy looking, which makes sense for the Rivian market. You want it to be functional and utility based, and that can be very Jeep-like or very Ford Bronco-like, so they want it to be more boxy, but objectively, that's not going to be as good for aerodynamics. And if you want to take a boxy vehicle designed like that on a great distance, you're going to need a bigger battery pack. You know, to get a Model Y to break the 300-mile range mark, it needs 80 kilowatt hours. So if you want a boxy vehicle like that, even if it's a little bit smaller to go over 300 miles, you're probably going to need close to 100 kilowatt hours, and that's just not going to be profitable to sell at these lower prices that Rivian is alluding that the R2 will start at. So my hope is that Rivian can double down on the fact that, hey, this is coming out in 2026. The R2 is definitely going to have the NACS port, so you can supercharge it, and there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of more V4 superchargers by 2026. Plus, Rivian will continue to expand their adventure network on top of that. And I think they could get by with starting off on like a 230, 240 mile range vehicle that doesn't need as massive as a battery pack, so it can still be profitable. And the compromise is just, yeah, the range isn't as good. But I can attest, as someone who drives one of the lowest range Teslas available, you can still road trip. It really comes down to charging curve and charger network, and charging infrastructure for EVs I think is going to look very different by 2026 than it does today. And my hope is that Rivian kind of leans into that. Like, we don't need giant, big, expensive battery packs in all our vehicles. We can get by with less range because we're going to rely on charging infrastructure and having a great charging curve, and that's where we're going to put our focus. And I also hope they can bring some reasonable cost-cutting measurements to the suspension system, the powertrain, and maybe that means cutting a bit more corners. No more Bluetooth speaker in the center console, no more flashlight in the door. Maybe you don't have a powered liftgate on the frunk anymore, or a substantially smaller frunk, and perhaps you just get by with one center display, which might feel a little bit too Tesla-like, but hey, we gotta look at the pennies now, okay? Rivian getting the R1S and R1T into production was about trying to cut out a few dollars here and there, but to get the R2 profitable, they need to cut out pennies. So that might mean no driver displays. That might mean a more basic, bare-bones interior that doesn't look as beautiful as the R1 lineup, and I think that's okay because it's not intended to replace the R1 vehicles. You still want people buying the R1. That's kind of the tricky, delicate balance of unveiling the R2. Honestly, pretty early, which has me kind of worried. Like, how many people are not going to buy an R1S or R1T because of this unveiling? Because they find out that the R2 is way better, or way cheaper at least, and that convinces them that, yeah, I want to buy a Rivian. I want to support support this company, I want to rock this brand, but I just don't want to have to spend the $70,000-$80,000 on the vehicle. And if this R2 is only going to cost me 45 or 55,000 bucks, then yeah, I'll just wait for that for a couple years. But I could totally see next month a ton of people putting reservations down. But what do you guys think's going to happen? Do you think Rivian will not compromise on the range and find a way to sell $40,000-$50,000 vehicles with 100 kilowatt-hour battery packs, or do you think there is a way to make the R2 more efficient despite its very boxy design, which is not very aerodynamic? All that good stuff. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Take care.